Here we are, clan the isms, cataclysm, great. Our people out here struggling, trying to make it in this state. Everybody out here doing it, but we the ones who late. Now family, we the ones who gotta delegate. Get that money in the power, never be fake. Stick to cosign for 3. What did he say? Create jobs, support our own. Educate the same and buy back your home. Got 3 degrees, triple 10. 3 PhDs, now we on the CNN. DBTV, let's talk about negligence. Ignorance is bliss, but we can turn it to intelligence. Believe none of what you hear, half of what you see. Let's break it down here on Dr Boyce TV. Here we are,
Black Business School, and I would like to welcome you to drboycetv.com. This is the home for intelligent Black people, and this is where we talk about all the topics that intelligent Black people discuss when we are in quarantine. And today my special guest is attorney Kimleah Sherman. And Kimleah is a brilliant lady, and she knows a whole lot about estate planning, among other things. And before I begin, I'd like to ask Kimleah, how are you doing today, sister?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you, Dr. Boyce?
I'm doing extremely well, extremely well. Welcome now, sorry, give me a second. This is the home. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. All right, so Kimleah, let's start from the beginning. So you live in Maryland, is that correct?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so you're going through the quarantine, and I imagine, like most attorneys, like there's not a lot of action in terms of. I know you're not going to court or anything. What do attorneys do during the quarantine? How is it tougher for attorneys than for everybody else, or about the same, or less tough? Or what do you think?
I think that depends on the area of law that you practice. For me, for estate planning, everybody is now hypersensitive about the need for estate planning. So I'm getting the calls with regards to estate planning, and the government has deemed attorneys as essential personnel. And I have a virtual firm, so I'm able to provide my clients with the estate plans without having the personal interaction. I can do everything virtually. And the governor has recently allowed us to have the documents notarized remotely. So that allows me to continue to serve my clients, especially the clients that are hyper concerned about getting their affairs in order.
Wow. Well, I like that a lot. I think that's really, really great. And I was asking that question because, anybody who does business knows there's always like legal stuff kind of happening. And we were kind of trying to figure out how to move forward on some of our legal stuff, because everything's just shut down. And I want to, first of all, say hello to everybody that's coming into the chat. In case you just got here, I'm speaking with attorney Kimleah Sherman. And Kimleah has a great story that I want to share. But before I begin, Kimleah, I always greet my people and let them know how much I love them and appreciate them. And so everybody in here, I see you, Max and Divine, and more Melanin, please, and Yvette and Teddy and Rhonda or Cirrus. I want to say hello to everybody, and put your hashtag B1 in the chat to let us know that you're Black first. Just in case you don't know, in this space, B1 means that we're Black first, and it means that we must be one in order for us to win. So when we choose to be one, then we will have one. So put your hashtag B1 in the chat. Okay, so Kimleah, let's start with your story. Now, you had a really interesting story. I met you at an event hosted by Lamar Tyler in Atlanta, and I was really intrigued. I know my brother was intrigued. My brother said, "Oh my gosh, you got to talk to this lady. Did you really hear the rest of her story?" And I said, "I heard some of it." And he's like, "No, you didn't hear the good stuff." So you had a really amazing story. And the part that I'll start with is this, especially now, given that everybody is thinking about, we're all sort of confronted with our own mortality, right? As we're watching things happen around us that are kind of unpleasant to observe, but it's real life, right? Death is a part of life. We all know this. You actually, in my opinion, it sounds to me, based on how you told the story, you took a really devastating experience and actually flipped that into something pretty extraordinary. Can you talk about that? You went to the doctor and got a diagnosis. Do you mind sharing that story with us?
Sure, Dr. Boyce. I was young, young soccer mom, wife. I worked out 5 days a week. I did all the things that the quote unquote book says to do, and to maintain your health, right? I was very conscious of what I ate. I was, very health conscious, but I started to have some discomforts in my body. I started to feel some abnormal pain, and I went to the doctor, and I went probably about over the course of about 6 months. I went back and forth to different specialists. They ran a lot of tests, hey, everything's fine. They wanted me to believe that I was okay, but I was well enough in tune with my body that I knew that something just wasn't right. So I kept going to different specialists. And then finally I got a call after having all these tests done. And they wanted me to come in the very next day, which was kind of odd because this guy, you know, his appointments are like 3-4 weeks out, right? I didn't really think anything of it. I said, you know, hey, I'll just go in on my way to work. So when I got there, I got a diagnosis that I just totally wasn't expecting. He said, I was diagnosed with a rare condition, and he told me that I need to have surgery immediately, and the odds of my survival were not that great. He had consulted all these specialists in this area, and it just didn't look good for me, right? He said, you need to have surgery immediately. Immediately, I started thinking about my husband and my 2 young kids, right? What are they going to do? You know, I'm not going to survive. And this was in November. You know, the holidays are coming up. My kid's birthday's coming up. And I decided that if I wasn't going to survive the surgery, I wasn't going to expedite my death. And I surely was not going to do it during the holidays, right? I didn't tell my husband, didn't tell anyone. And I decided that I was going to go ahead and make sure that all of my affairs were in order so that my family didn't have to take care of that. I wrote love letters to my family members. I started writing their script for my video that I was going to produce for my memorial service in lieu of a eulogy. I made sure that I documented all the counts and passwords and things like that. I had a will that I'd gotten when I was in the military. It was simply a boilerplate will. And 87 days I spent secretly planning for my death. That was probably the most difficult season of my life, but it was the most necessary. And I didn't understand it at the time, but I now understand in hindsight, looking back on it, was that I needed that. I needed that because that allows me to be the type of estate planning attorney that I am. I can understand my clients' situations. And I also understand the need to create the plan before the crisis, because there were days when I was trying to make decisions and trying to make plans, but I was so overwhelmed with emotions that I couldn't think properly in a way that I would if I was not in the midst of the crisis. So that's one of the reasons that I became an estate planning attorney, because this was prior to becoming an estate planning attorney. But it wasn't until I became an attorney that I recognized that although I had done all these things and spent so much time planning, my family wasn't secured and my family wasn't protected and my assets weren't protected in the way that I had hoped that they would be. And I also recognized that it wasn't just me that feels this way. You know, oftentimes we think that, but they don't understand that although a will serves its purpose, it is not an estate planning asset protection tool, which is what I wanted for my family. I wanted to make sure that I protect my kids, my husband, my family's assets, so that I can transfer those assets when I pass.
Wow. Everybody who's watching, I'm speaking to attorney Kimlia Sherman, and we're talking about the importance of estate planning, which unfortunately she learned this the hard way. I think there's nothing that lets us appreciate life more than confronting death, than knowing that that death doesn't care how busy your schedule is or what your plans are or what you thought you were going to do over the next 10 to 20 years. You know, sometimes it just comes along and when you least expect it. So let me ask you this: how many kids you got?
I have 2 kids.
2 kids, okay. And how old were your kids at the time when you received your diagnosis?
My kids were about 12 and 7 and 12. They were young.
Did you tell them?
I didn't tell them until after the fact. I didn't even tell my mom until after the fact. I didn't tell my husband didn't find out how serious it was until we showed up at the hospital and the doctor actually told him, because my physician was very irate that, I didn't come in, because they called me several times and say, hey, we need you to come in to have the surgery. And I told him, don't call me. I will call you when I'm ready to have the surgery. And that didn't go well with my doctor. In his terms, I was a walking time bomb, but I'm still here. Whoa.
Wow. So let me ask you this. So at what point did you find out that you weren't going to die? When was the turning point for that?
It wasn't until I survived the surgery.
Really?
Okay. Yeah, it wasn't until I woke up from the surgery. Actually, when I went into surgery, I did not know if I was going to make it out.
Wow. So when you had that last conversation with your family, what was that like for you?
Again, I wanted to protect them. I didn't want them to worry. I was hopeful that I would make it out of the surgery, but I cherished every moment going into the surgery. And I wanted them to know, how proud I was, how much I loved them. And I left love letters for them. I left letters for them because I wanted to make sure that, if I didn't survive the surgery, that they knew, how much I loved them, how much I appreciated them, and how I did everything for them.
So, one of the things I thought about, it struck at me also when you mentioned that you were a member of the military. What branch of the military were you in? Air Force,
I
right?
was in the I was in the Air Force for 10.5 years.
Air Force. Okay. Well, thank you for your service, first of all. And also thank you for your service for everybody in here that's in the military. I don't know if I mentioned that to you, but a lot of the people that follow the platform tend to be, I have a lot of military folks that are in there. And I think it's because of the way, the way my dad was a soldier, he went to Vietnam. And I think that there's a way that soldiers think that's different from the general population. I connect, maybe I'm overthinking it here, but I'm connecting, your background as a soldier with the fact that even though you were facing the really dire situation, you still executed. You still knew you had to have a plan. You started preparing, you started laying things out, and so it reminds me of some of the best lessons I've learned from the soldiers who mentored me. I remember I had a friend who was a Marine. He was an old Marine, or ex-Marine by the name of W.C. Benton, who was one of the greatest professors in the world at in operations research at Ohio State University. He's actually one of the guys that's most responsible for helping me get my PhD finished, because it was very political, and he went in there and fought for me, and I appreciate it. To this day, I always appreciate it. And I remember one time I was telling him about something I was going through, and I was complaining and mad and whatever, and he said, "Boyce," he said, "when I was in the Marines," he said, "they taught us that it doesn't matter, even if you're not gonna make it, you fight and you shoot until the last bullet goes out of your gun." And I was like, "That's right. I'm gonna shoot till the bullet, till I empty the clip." And so anyway, I wonder, do you think that background, that military background, is kind of what helped you to just maintain? Because some people just break down and crumble and fall apart. It seemed like you kind of were able to keep it going. Tell us about that.
I think I would attribute it to being raised by my grandmother. You don't give up. And I always had the attitude that I was going to succeed or I was going to die trying. And for me, as a mom and as a wife, I owed it to them to make sure that they were protected. So it was my position that I was going to do everything that I could to protect my family and to make sure that they were taken care of. Because if I was going to die, I was going to die anyways, right? So I didn't want part of them to die with me.
Wow.
So it was my job to make sure that I protected them and that we celebrated my last days here on earth versus mourning my last days on earth. For me, they would have time to mourn my death, but I wanted to celebrate my life before I left.
Wow. Everybody who just came in, just so you know, I want to make sure everybody knows who you are, because some of you just came in. I'm speaking with attorney Kimleah Sherman, and we're talking about how her near-death experience pushed her into becoming an estate planning attorney. And it was the act of actually planning for her death that led her to notice some of the holes that many of us miss when it comes to making sure that we can pass assets to our family, give them hope, make sure their lives were better because you were here. I think that's really important. I know, Kimleah, for myself, that's one thing that I tell my fiance, soon-to-be wife, all the time, is I say, look, I know at some point, I won't be here, and I want to go knowing that everybody in my space will be better off, not just okay, not just surviving, but better off because I was here, that my sacrifice, meant something to the people I care about. So when you were going through this process of planning for your own death, and you were going through your estate plan, and you were noticing some things that you thought were secure, but they weren't, what were some of the things that you learned during that process that stuck with you as you chose to become an estate planning attorney?
One of the most important things that stuck with me is that I think we have this idea that a will is the only estate planning tool that we need. And we feel that a will covers everything. A will protect our assets. But what I didn't realize is that when I transfer my assets directly through a will, my assets are in jeopardy of being lost through creditors, what I call creditors and predators, i.e. lawsuits, the federal government, state, local governments, things like that. So I recognize that even naming my family as the beneficiaries on my insurance policy was not the best estate planning strategy for me or my family.
Really interesting. So, okay, so when you say that those were not the best tools in terms of leaving assets for your family, what did you find to be superior tools to help you, seamlessly transfer the assets to your loved ones?
Well, because I want to protect those assets, a will does not protect your assets from, like I said, creditors and predators. It doesn't protect those assets, although it makes sure that they it transfers those assets, potentially transfers those assets. It may or may not transfer those assets, because what happens when you transfer your assets through a will, it has to go through the probate process, and those assets are considered some of the assets are considered probate assets. The assets that are your insurance policy is not as a non-probate asset, but that's a different conversation. But the assets that you transfer through your will, those assets are probate assets, and they have to go through the probate process. That can be a lengthy process, that can be an expensive process, and your heirs will get what's left. Before they get anything, those assets, creditors and all debts against the estate must be settled, right? And that may come out of those assets that you intended for your heirs to have. So it can totally deplete the value of your assets, and your heirs will get a lot less than you intended. For example, I'll give you the example of Aretha Franklin. When she died without an estate plan, I understand that she had, there's some conversation about she had some written wills, and that's a whole different conversation. But her $80 million estate immediately decreased by $27.5 million, because 40% of anything in excess of $11.8 million of her assets goes to the government and estate taxes, federal estate taxes. Now, Michigan didn't have state estate taxes, but some states do. So if you go from 80 million to immediately 52.5 million, even if she had a will, it would not have protected her assets. And I actually saw the article that was posted the other day, and I kind of cringed, because when I first saw it, there was a young lady that talked about how they lost her mother's house. And she said, if we had had a will, then we wouldn't have had to go to court. And that's not true. There's a lot of misunderstandings in our community about that estate planning process, and how people think the laws work, and they don't necessarily work that way, which is why I make it, it's part of my mission to educate and empower our community, because we have lost so much of our assets because of our misunderstanding and our reliance on myths with regards to estate planning, and that's not really how it works. So for me, one of the things that was highlighted for me during my process was that my assets weren't protected. I don't want to name my children as the beneficiaries on my insurance policy. I don't want my assets to be directly transferred to my kids, because, at the age of 18, my kids would have gotten the assets. At 18 years old, let's just say $500,000 or $1 million, it's not going to be used in the way that is responsible.
That money's gone. If they get, how many of y'all in the chat?
Absolutely.
Your parents,
so we don't want to do that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I want to ask everybody in the chat, answer the question real quick, maybe one word. What would have happened if somebody had left you $500,000 at the age of 18? Tell me what you would have did with that money, how fast it would have been gone. I'll tell you, Kimberly, that money would have burned a hole in my pocket real fast. I would have been the flyest freshman in the history of the University of Kentucky, but I would have been the brokest senior, because big money would have also probably led to big debts and big chaos. And money, a lot of people don't know this, but I mean, money can ruin your life too. It can't just enhance your life. It can actually ruin it. So let me ask you this, Ms. Sherman. So Attorney Sherman, excuse me. What do people do? They call you Kimlia, Miss Sherman, Attorney Sherman? What do you like to be called?
They call me Kimlia. Kimlia is good. Kimlia is good.
Okay, well,
I know I'm an attorney. They know I'm an attorney if they need me. So
all right. Kimlia. And Kimlia is a great name. And everybody, I'm talking to Attorney Kimlia Sherman, and we're talking about death planning, which is a grim topic, but it's something that we all need to think about. Who knows? Maybe now one of the small benefits of kind of dealing with this chaos is we're thinking about that a little bit more. But I hate to give you guys the bad news. I'm going to break some news to you guys that may shock a lot of you, but you're going to die. At some point, you're going to die. So in your case, Kimmy, it sounds like you had to endure the horror of knowing that your death was going to come sooner rather than later, but it's coming for everybody. Death is going to stop at everybody's house. And I would, let me ask you about this. I've always felt that in our community, people just don't like to really talk about death. It's just not something that is a pleasant topic, and people avoid it. Can you kind of speak to some of that in terms of what you've seen as an estate planning attorney?
I agree. We don't want to talk about death, but I just want to kind of take a step back. Estate planning isn't death planning. Estate planning, I consider it contingency planning and crisis management, because it's not just about planning for what happens when you die. It's also what happens in the event of a crisis. What if you become incapacitated and you can't make decisions for yourself? You want to make sure that you have plans in place so that you have someone to make medical decisions for you. And choosing the right person or the wrong person could be a matter of life and death. And you also want to, in the event that you become incapacitated, you want to make sure that you have someone to manage your finances. You also want to make sure that you have someone that's going to take care of your minor children, if you have minor children. So one of the biggest mistakes that we make when we think about estate planning is thinking about it in the terms of death planning. And for me, it's more important that I plan for what happens if I become incapacitated and who's going to take care of my minor children than who's going to get my stuff if I die.
Wow. Well, you know what? I like that a lot. I like changing the terminology. I think that's great. And really also, you know, you mentioned crisis planning, which I think is perfectly accurate. It sounds so much better than death planning anyway. Like, who wants to talk about that, right? But also, my personal relationship with estate planning is I see it also as continuity planning. You know, it's a transition planning where, you know, when you know, if I'm building something now, I kind of want it to be here when I'm gone. You know, I kind of want it to function properly. And so I have tried my best, and it's an ongoing process, right? And my goal was, I just want to make sure that, you know, that for the people that matter to me, that everything is as smooth if I'm gone as it is when I'm here, or if something were to happen to me, like you mentioned, incapacitated, something like that. You know, I said, gosh, I want to know that, I want to make sure my wife can get into my bank account tomorrow if she's got to get in there to pay, you know, the mortgage. I want to make sure that my business can keep functioning so they don't have 6 months or a year in limbo trying to get a hold of the assets. And I think that with what we're seeing right now with the big crisis and the pandemic and everything, just getting money from one place to another, you know, through the red tape is a huge issue. You know, I got a text message from somebody today who said, I haven't got my stimulus check and my money, you know, and it made me think about how hard it is sometimes, you know, to legally get assets from one place to another. So let me ask you this question, Kimberly, you know, as a person who knows a lot about estate planning, what are some of the horror stories you've seen in terms of families that didn't take estate planning seriously and until it was too late?
Well, we see a lot of it in the media when we see a lot of these celebrities that are, you know, dying without their estate plans, how much money they're losing. But there's a difference when you go from 80 million to 52 million. Your family can still survive and thrive with 52 million, which at the end of the day with Aretha Franklin is unlikely that her family is going to get the 52 million, because a lot of that is going to be spent in attorney's fees, you know, administration fees, court fees, and things like that. But for those that aren't celebrities or those that don't have the hundreds of millions of dollars, you see the broken relationships, kids, you know, the siblings fighting over, you know, who gets what and who should be entitled to what. But more importantly, one of the other reasons that I'm an estate planning attorney is because my mom and her 8 siblings had to make the difficult decision to remove my grandmother from life support. When you don't put plans in place and you haven't had that conversation, oftentimes it's difficult enough for siblings to make a decision about what restaurant they're going to eat at. So if you can imagine having to make a difficult decision with regards to removing your loved one from life support, that is very, very difficult for anyone. But if you take the necessary steps and do the proper planning, then that's all those decisions are memorialized in your healthcare directive, because you've already decided under these circumstances, this is the type of medical care I want. And this is at this point, I want you to make the decision to remove me from life support. It takes that additional burden from your family from having to make those decisions. You have that. And then you also have appointing the wrong people on your team. I call it your legacy squad. I also think of estate planning as legacy planning as well. But I call it your legacy squad because you want to make sure that you're appointing the right people, putting the right people on your team to make the right decisions. Not only you want someone that, because oftentimes what people do is they'll appoint someone based on their relationship with them. Oh, it's my oldest daughter, so I'm going to make her my healthcare agent. But the older daughter doesn't have the emotional fortitude to make difficult decisions under a crisis. So she folds and she's indecisive. And when you're having a medical situation, a delayed decision can be a difference in life and death. And that has, you know, on occasion been the case. Or you have someone that, one of the things that's often most heart-wrenching is when the grandmother appoints her grandchild as the power of attorney, and the grandchild goes in and takes all the grandmother's money and sells the grandmother's house and drops her off at the nursing facility or something like that. Those types of things. But then you also have, when you have a family member, your aging parent that, is diagnosed with dementia, and they don't have an estate plan in place, they don't have long-term care insurance, and you have to make the decision, do I put my parents in a nursing facility, or do I quit my job that I love, the thing that I've worked so hard for, and come home and take care of my parents? Those are difficult decisions that you have to make. But if you haven't had the conversation, or you haven't put the proper plans in place, then that can be devastating on your family. It can be devastating on you. If you can imagine having a family, your typical family where you're used to going, on family vacations, and, you're used to having a certain lifestyle, and all of a sudden that has come to a halt because you have to take care of your aging family member because of the guilt that you feel because you don't want to drop them off in the nursing facility, or family members losing their assets. In our community, that is one of the biggest and most tragic things within our community when it comes down to not planning. We lose so much of our assets. Since 1910, African Americans have lost hundreds of billions of dollars in heirs property. I was talking to an individual a few weeks ago, and her family had 120 acres of land in the South, and now that they have 12. Do you know how much wealth that is, from 120 acres to 12? And she doesn't even know who owns it, because oftentimes when we inherit this property, we just think that, I don't have to go through the heirs, I don't have to go through the probate process, so they don't. And then when something happens, there's no proof of ownership because your loved ones have died, and there's a statutory time frame within which you have to go through the probate process. There was a case where there was an individual who had lived in her parents' home that she had inherited for 40 years. She forgot to pay the state taxes, which was $82.31. $82.31. She forgot to pay those taxes, right? You know what happened? They put a lien on her property because she forgot to pay the taxes, because when she found out, she went down to the courthouse, but she had no proof of ownership. She could not prove that she actually owned that property, and a local politician came in and bought the property because it was near a luxury resort.
Wow.
And he bought it for pennies on the dollar. That's how we're losing our assets, because we are relying on what someone told us happened to their family member, or this happened, and we don't have the understanding, and we rely on misinformation, and we're losing out because of that. And another thing that I think of estate planning as is insurance. It's insurance for your wealth. It's insurance for your family. When we go out and buy that 750 BMW, we have no problem with putting insurance on it. When we go out and buy that $1 million home, we have no problem with putting insurance on it. But we're not insuring our wealth.
Wow.
I got to calm down a little bit, Dr. Boyce, because I get excited about this stuff, right? We're not thinking about insuring our wealth. We're not thinking about investing in an estate plan to make sure that our assets are protected. But we will go in and get something off of download something off the internet, or get something off of, I call it a legal factory, where they're just giving you templates, and we think that we know. You don't understand what you don't know until you need to know it, and then it's too late. Imagine being in your parents' home for 40 years and all of a sudden now you're homeless because you didn't know. Hundreds of billions of dollars. The loss of heirs property is one of the biggest contributors to the racial wealth gap.
Wow.
Like I said, Aretha Franklin went from 80 million to 52 million
just like that.
Just like that.
Wow. And
guess who's getting wealthy off of it?
Well, and then there's the story of Prince.
Absolutely.
I mean, last I checked, I think they got 70 million out of his estate just from all.
And it's still not settled. It's still not settled.
Yeah.
James Brown, and the reality is, it's because we don't know. Because there's no reason for them not to have an estate plan. None at all. They don't understand the risk. We don't understand the risk because there's so many risks. It's the potential of getting ill. It's the potential of, even like in cases where people are getting like government assistance because they have special needs or something like that. If you inherit your parents' insurance policy, you're immediately disqualified because, the government's not trying to give you any money if they don't have to. But there are ways that you can structure your estate plan so that if your special needs if your child has special needs or your family member has special needs, you can structure your estate plan in a way that they still qualify for government benefits, but they still have use and access to those, to your assets.
Wow. Wow, this is really interesting stuff. This is really, really beneficial, and you know, and it makes me think about. And by the way, I'm talking to Kimlia Sherman. Kimlia Sherman is an estate plan, an attorney who knows a lot about estate planning. I don't want to put her in a box unnecessarily, but she's damn good at estate planning, and we're talking about just all of this. And it's not death planning. It's we decided we're going to call it crisis and continuity planning, and legacy planning, and insurance on your legacy. And so, you know, one thing I want to mention to you, Kimlia, is and by the way, if you're watching, please hit the thumbs up button. Hit the thumbs up button if you haven't done it yet, and follow the Black Financial Channel, theblackfinancialchannel.com. Also follow the Black Financial Channel on Instagram. Make sure you do that. So you know, Kimlia, I remember I had a conversation with a lawyer, an estate planning attorney in DC. And I remember that this lawyer, you know, she's a sister who really just told me the truth about how much money a lot of attorneys make, like that entire law firms are kept afloat from all the people that did not plan for their estate. She said, oh, a lot of my friends pay almost all their bills from the people that did not make a plan, that are not prepared for death. Can you speak to that in terms of what you've seen on that front?
That is absolutely true. I tell people either you're going to pay up front or you're going to pay on the back end. And I promise you, when you pay on the back end, it's going to be more costly. And not only that, not only the financial side, but it's more costly with regards to emotional side, the emotional aspect and your family aspect, because families are destroyed because of lack of estate planning, because you have, you know, family members that are going to court. When you look at the celebrities, you know, you have family members that are going to court fighting over who should get what and who should make the decisions and things like that. But on the other hand, you also have situations where it's not just about, you know, the maliciousness of, you know, the families fighting because of the conflict. It's often sometimes if you have a loved one that has a medical crisis and two people can't make a decision with regards to what type of care they should get, and they may have the same ultimate goal, they may have, you know, their family member's best interest, but how to get there may differ. So you have those types of things. But then you also have to, you know, hire an attorney to go through the probate process and go through the legal process of fighting for who gets what, you know. So like I said, I see it as an insurance, and it also gives you peace of mind in knowing that, you know, your family's taken care of, and they won't, you know, there's always that likelihood of there being conflict, but it minimizes the likelihood of there being conflict if you plan in advance. And one of the parts of estate planning that sometimes family members miss is the conversation. I tell people when I'm doing my training, have a conversation. Talk to your family members about why you're making these decisions. Get their input, because just because you appoint someone as your personal representative doesn't necessarily mean that that person is the proper person. It doesn't necessarily mean that that person is willing to do it, because, you know, when I counsel my clients, I also talk to them about how to choose their personal representatives for each position. You want to, if you have a trust, you want to make sure that you're taking in consideration certain characteristics with regards to whether or not they can manage your trust, certain characteristics with regards to your medical care, your financial care when you're alive, as well as managing your estate as the executor. So there are certain things that you want to take into consideration. And, you know, and like I said, sometimes we feel a sense of obligation because this is the oldest child, or this is my spouse. Your spouse may or may not be the right person to, you know, make certain decisions. If you have concerns with regards to your spouse being taken advantage of, that may not be the person that you want to put in charge of the money, because, you know, the money may not be used in the way that is in the best interest of the family or in the way that you intended it. If, you know, the creditors and predators come out, because we know that when, you know, things happen, you see the worst, you see the best of people, but you also see the worst of people as well.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the stress of that. Oh gosh, I've seen some things as well in my own experience, but I mean, it's, you know, there's always those curveballs that get thrown at you that you know, and I just, you know, I can handle the fast pitches across the plate, you know, where I know when they come in what direction, but the curveballs in life are the ones that really throw you into these existential crises, you know. And I want to say thank you, Angelique, for your donation. Thank you for donating in the chat. She says, thank you for having this conversation. I speak on this as well as a Legal Shield associate. Oh, very nice. Good for you. Good for you. I love it. So Kimlia, let me ask you this. So attorney Kimlia Sherman, where can people follow up and get in touch with you if they'd like to know more about you?
Sure. You can follow me on my social media platforms at Reed Sherman Law. I also have a Facebook group, Secure the Legacy Movement, where I do Facebook Lives. I do Q&A sessions. You know, I'm bringing in experts to talk about different aspects of legacy building. And also my website, reedshermanlaw.com, and Reed is ReedShermanLaw.com. And if you go to my website, there's a comprehensive guide that you can download that will help you get started with your estate planning process.
All right.
And if you're in Maryland and DC and you're ready to protect your family, secure your wealth, and preserve your legacy, by all means, give me a call and I'll be sure to help you out.
All right. All right. Everybody who's watching, I hope you will show appreciation for the sister taking her time in her busy schedule, because, you know, these lawyers, their fees are not cheap. And so she took this time to donate this to the community. So I hope you will give her a digital thank you, digital round of applause for being Black and intelligent and helping us prepare for the future. I want to also say thank you, Kimlia. It's really been a pleasure talking to you, and your story is remarkable, and your passion. I like your passion for what you do. That's what tells me that you're a genius. You know, I love it. I love it when people are smart and they just are into it. You know, so thank you so much for dropping in. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
For sure. All right, let me repeat the information for everybody in the chat in case you didn't get it. The Facebook group is called the Secure the Legacy Movement. If you look up, it's reedshermanlaw.com. That's the website.
Yes.
Okay. Reedshermanlaw.com is where you can find out more. The Secure the Legacy Movement is what Kimlia has going on Facebook. And I want to say thank you guys for hanging out with us today. And make sure you hit the thumbs up button, share, and subscribe button. And make sure you subscribe at theblackfinancialchannel.com, where we do daily financial news and commentary from a Black perspective. So make sure you keep hanging out with us. We'll bring you lots of great stuff. And we'll also bring Kimlia back, because I love the way you communicate information. And once again, thank you so much. It's been an honor having you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been an honor being here.
All right. All right. So everybody have a good day, and hashtag be one in the chat, and you guys will see us again real soon. Take care now. Peace. Bye, Kimlia.
Thank you, Dr. Boyce.
Here we are, clan the isms, cataclysm great. Our people out here struggling, trying to make it in this state. Everybody out here doing it, but we the ones who late. Now family, we the ones who gotta delegate. Get that money in the power, never be fake. Stick to cosign for 3. What did he say? Create jobs, support our own. Educate the same and buy back your home. Got 3 degrees, triple 10. 3 PhDs, now we on the CNN. DBTV, let's talk about negligence. Ignorance is bliss, but we can turn it to intelligence. Believe none of what you hear, half of what you see. Let's break it down here on Dr. Boyce TV. Here we are.